Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum and greetings. I'm Dr. Anisur Rahman, Associate Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering. On behalf of East West University, would like to welcome you back here in Bangladesh and around the world. As you might know, this is the second part of the webinar. In this phase of the webinar, we will be having two more talks followed by a closing session. So I am soliciting your patience, and for that, I'm thanking you in advance. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. A.K. Enamul Haque, Professor, Department of Economics, East West University, Bangladesh. Like before, formal introduction of Professor Haque and his talk will be presented by the session chair. For that matter, I would like to welcome and request the chair, Professor Mustafa Azad Kamal, Dean, School of Business, Bangladesh Open University, Bangladesh, to conduct the session. Let's welcome Professor Kamal. Sir, please, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introducing this session. Dear colleagues and participants from Bangladesh and outside the country, so we are welcoming all of you to this very important session. This session title is Assessing the Outcomes Using Various Assessment Techniques. This is very important topic, especially during this time, because we are struggling with some final exams or some other forms of exams. So if we cannot assess the outcomes properly, then of course the degrees and certificates or grades are always comes under question. So it is very important to assess the outcomes by using a right technique. So in that sense, this session is very much important for the academics, especially here and abroad. So today we have a very renowned specialist in that area. I know sir for a long time. He is Dr. A.K. Enamul Haque. He's the professor of economics at East West University. He received his prestigious Commonwealth Scholarship and completed his PhD from Canada in natural resource economics. After returning to Bangladesh, Dr. Haque started his teaching career at the University of Chittagong. Then he moved to Bangladesh Open University and contributed towards standardizing distance education in business education in Bangladesh. And he was the founder dean of the School of Business, Bangladesh Open University, where I am now the dean. Dr. Haque joined the first private university in Bangladesh in 1996 and contributed towards standardizing private university education systems in Bangladesh and the Department of Economics at the North-South University. He joined the East West University in 2004 and developed the Department of Economics there. And he has worked in the United International University to establish the Department of Economics there, and was an honorary advisor to Bracken University, Bangladesh. He got a lot of other engagements, nationally and internationally. Especially, he is a founding member to establish the South Asian Network for Environmental Economics, and is currently the advisor to SANDI, a program for the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Nepal. He has published several books and research articles with Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, Springer Nature, and with many other publishers. He is an editorial advisory board member of the Indian Journal of Ecological Economics and Journal of Social and Economic Development. So these are very few words for telling about Dr. Enamul Haque. Since I was attached to him from my career at Bangladesh Open University, I know his depth in understanding the pedagogy and popularizing the distance education. This was the first time in Bangladesh. And today we will listen to him very carefully, and we'll try to engage ourselves in this discussion so that we can contribute more and we can learn more from this great expert. With these few words now, I would like to invite Dr. A.K. Enamul Haque for his presentation. So, sir, you will get, I think, 30 minutes because the duration is, we have to keep 10 minutes for discussion in the question answer session. So now you can begin with your presentation. It's over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you can hear me.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Let me present my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, sir. You can see it.
Thank you very much. My topic is evaluating educational performance, basically, something that we all teachers do. And whenever we do it, I think I will try to understand it from a different perspective. First of all, we evaluate what? That is a more important question that we feel as a teacher that we evaluate students' performance. That is what we do. But end of the day, education is, we are not evaluating his performance, we're evaluating the performance of his student. He is into the educational system. So in order to understand this, I think the first thing that we should always carefully look into that what is the purpose of the education. Is it a means? To me, the first question that I always think about it is it a means or it is an end by itself? That is something very important. And if it is a means, it must be a means for achieving certain things. So the question that we will think about it, what does it want to achieve as a means? And that is something that I as an educationist want to know before I want to go to evaluation. And in this particular case, I'm going to go to a little bit of a history of education because I think before evaluating, we should understand the way we are currently doing, because we know we as a teacher, all of us evaluate in certain ways, certain examination system, and system that we sometimes we inherited without knowing or not knowing. So we might be able to find out exactly what we do now. Maybe it is linked to the history. If you go back, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but if you go back to the Egyptian and Mesopotamian education system, the original system of education, this is before the BC and a long time ago. Mostly it was science, medicine, geometry, mathematics, and law, and astrology. That was their formal education. And they had a vocational education, which is architecture, engineering, sculpture. So these are the vocational education. Education started roughly about 5 to 7 years, 17 years. That was that time frame. And mostly for priesthood, that was their target for education. Education partly was memorization. That was how education started. Oral repetition, copying models, and individual instructions. And disciplined and harsh. That was a very harsh disciplined education. That was how Egyptian education was. You can see some linkage to that in our educational systems, and you can feel that, okay, there was this reason behind certain behavior that we do with our own students. The Chinese education model, which is also 1000 years, 1000 BC, right, long time ago, was interestingly more secular system. However, the education system was not designed for priesthood, but it was designed, and the first time they talked about the moral character towards developing people and for the people, duty towards people and state. So educated person are supposed to be morally correct in order to perform their duty towards people and state. That was the first time they brought in as a secular phenomenon. And formal schooling they started. It was also based on books, rituals by word of mouth, and rote learning and rigid instructions. So you can see the rote learning method that we all do has embedded in the beginning and many, many thousands of years, 2000 years ago, 3000 years ago. that we are currently still following, and you can see the linkage to it. Maya and Inca civilization is very similar. Education was mostly, they had mostly medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and their idea was it is a strategy of training for self-restraint, cooperative works, rituals, and religion. The next, if you look at our Indian education, which we attended, old Indian education was mostly divided into the caste system.
I think there is some. So is it okay? I think there is some network problem.
So,
Okay, sir.
Evolve and add.
So, okay, colleagues, please keep your patience. I think sir is facing little network problem. So it will be okay, I think. Okay, sir.
Yes. Is it okay now? Can you
yes,
see?
Now it's clear. Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry. So
Okay.
the classical Indian education, which Nalanda University you all know, is also mathematics driven if you look into some of the class education system. And it was an interesting one. This particular one was Pathshala, Toll, Bihar, Mott, based on that. Vocational education was, in fact, that time was apprenticeship, something that we are all aware of. That is how a vocational education system was designed. We have other education system. I'm not going into of education. But the modern education system that we are looking at is primary, secondary. Now it is structured. And how did it start? If you think about it, mostly it was the reform in the 13th to 17th century. That is the time education, obviously in Europe, was also with the system we follow, was also, can you hear me well? I can see network problem.
Yes, sir.
Telling me. Okay.
Yeah,
so this particular system was also secular, but there was a very interesting, if you look into it, objective was to create bureaucrats. Now this is another objective was also to learn history. Religious was also there, medicine. So this is something very interesting. You can see how education is now moving in different direction. After that, we have, if you look into the new pedagogy of the 17th century, now this education is what we now mostly see. And still not what we are currently using. Theory and practice started out looking at that it's not forceful discipline, it's love to learn. Now we are looking more of a education towards the learners. Language skill came. So certain things, and this is the first time in 17th century women education started in the world. So you can see education is expanding. But the education that we normally are seeing is what was reformed in the 18th century in Europe. And Asia, it was, I would say, mostly 20th century, when education, what we see, is more of an education for colonial structure, but is also an interesting education with certain targets and achievement, language, culture, and also developing for bureaucracies, people, preparing people for bureaucracy, medicine, theology, law, and technology. These were the areas of education. After that, this particular education was now based on standardized test, which is known as competence test, language, culture, and nationalism. This is interesting because now the nationalism was part of education. The education that we see is the discipline-based. This is a new education system. And it was targeted for achieving national goals. And that's why I said this 20th century, because that is the time we actually look into the national curriculum and say, okay, education is to bring different linguistic group into one nationhood, and it was designed for that. Education was also theory practice. Critical thinking is now part of it, and obviously system-based learning, evaluation. So evaluation was system-based. In the 20th century, once the country is smaller, all the nations became independent out of colonization, the primary target is no longer, in many countries, not bureaucracy, is to develop professionals and experts. So that is the target of education. But this is also an education system which is very diverse and very heterogeneous. What you see in this particular education system, some people are learning only for social status. Some people are learning for their career. Some people are learning for education, political goals, family tradition, and some people think it's for developing a better society. So education now is much more, not only people are heterogeneous, objective is also heterogeneous. And we are developing or serving an education system that must eventually be evaluated based on all different criteria. However, as education becomes standardized, it has also become very rigid. Time constraint, space constraint. You finish in my university, you start in my university, finish in my university. Institutions constraint, and very system constraint. In other words, exams are there, admission has to be there. So all this regulatory rigidity started. And over time, by toward the end of the 20th century, we realized there is a gap now. The gap between demand and supply. What employers expect from our students is not what we are delivering. What we want our students is not what the students want. What students are trying to do is not what their parents want. And what parents want is not what the government wants. So realize that education is now into another change scenario, something that we should be aware of. And that's why we need to now look into education more holistically, because all of these stakeholders are part of the education system. And we should realize that education, is it a process to do something, or it means, how do you look into this? Does this education as a means, as a machine, or it has also its own goal? Sometimes education becomes, and this is something that we are used to, checkbox. How many credit hours you have finished, how many courses you have finished. It's like finishing this. Outcome, competence, skill are not part of the education. And to me, that is an important one, because if I'm educator, I should understand that we are supposed to produce an output, which is our students, learners, with certain outcomes, certain competencies, and not checkbox. The system was so rigid, flexibility was gone. Monotrack. Now, towards the end of the century, globally, not in our country, we went to multidisciplinary. People realized that monodisciplinary is not going to work. The new, people are now using education for more than one purpose. So we have to be very careful. Some people are only for developing skill, getting education. Same education system must also provide a critical thinking ability. So if you think carefully, these are all, and now the 21st century education is what the national education economic goals are there. Every nation wants to, and we have realized that this is a century where education has to provide students or learners with global competence. They must be able to have critical thinking. Countries must use them, research, so that they can contribute to the economic growth of this country. And it must be flexible, not only in time, place, and now with COVID, we understand it has to be also be flexible in mode. Doesn't matter, not only just classroom. So education has all these flexibility now built in, and that's when we are evaluating. What are we evaluating? So the major changes that you see actually is we are now moving into multidisciplinary education. Education, something that was previously never thought about education. In the 20th century, these became part of education. Many vocational trade that historically was vocational became now education. Education expanded into masses beyond the elite classes. And that is what education is, and is supposed to provide as achievement for national aspiration. The 21st century education is not only multicultural, multidisciplinary, it's also transdisciplinary. That is something we should be aware of. That is why the changes should be required among us. We should not go back to the education system that we know, that was the education system. So transdisciplinary education. What is transdisciplinary education? Not only that you have multiple disciplines, but the education must be cross-cultural. That is why nowadays education must be across the countries, across the region, provided in that manner. And it must also provide the human values, which must be also built into the education. An engineer is not just an engineer, he's a human being, is supposed to solve the problems of the society, should have certain values, honesty, integrity. I remember there was a seminar in Canada a few years ago that was trying to find out the business schools. They're asking that what type of modification in the MBA curriculum we need. And they asked the CEOs of 200 companies in New Brunswick University. And they asked them that, tell us, what do you want from our graduates? The biggest shock they had was that the employers were telling them, teach them honesty, teach them integrity, because many of the things are computerized. Those things I can train them. But how do you teach honesty to them? Because that is where the recession starts. That is how economic collapses. So education system must understand those values that is important. So it's not a mechanics that we think about. And all education system must have a minimum competence level. So when you evaluate, competency is a part of it. The value level has to be also evaluated. Behavioral, that's where soft skill comes nowadays. You will see all these are issues of evaluation. So we should not just remain, and this is why curriculum has to be looked at. And cross-institutional, 2, 3, 4 institutions create one degree, because that helps students to become a better person. So if I want to do this, shall we just become the same teacher and say, now this is objective-based education, we have to change this? Same one in a different bottle? Answer is no. This is not how education system reform. It's not just simply saying we have outcome-based education and we do exactly the same thing in a different bottle. That's not what, it's a paradigm shift. Not only in terms of, we need to look into the curriculum with a logic. What is the outcome of the program? What is the outcome of the course to the match? So these are design issues for a curriculum. And then we move into course level and say, are the courses correct? Are the courses designed properly? We need to develop teachers training. Only after all these, actually, you can say, okay, I have an evaluation system based on this. The evaluation tools has to be much more open. It's not a rote learning. Rote learning requires memorization. We also need to understand that people are educated, and this is something I must mention. That certain education must have a certain skill, and those are minimum skills. Very old time, we still have in Madrasa education system, Islamic education, we have Hafiz. I have never heard about half Hafiz. We have doctors. You will never heard about a half doctor. So certain competence must be 100%, not 50%. We have to understand that if you are evaluating, I'm not producing a half doctor. I'm going to produce a doctor. So there are certain skills, 100% competencies are required, and we have to evaluate that. 50% competency is not acceptable. Innovation-based education and discovery-based education, deliveries of the skills, these are all issues that we should be aware of. That, okay, this is what we're looking at. And we must evaluate, if we think about it, that critical thinking must be evaluated. This morning we heard from Professor Jim, and he was talking about critical thinking. Part of the higher education, you have to teach it, we have to learn, and we have to evaluate separately. Skill and competence I've already mentioned. And in top of it, honesty, integrity, human values, and understanding of human civilization, so that we get a better society. This is a means of education. This must be there. So education must be ready for providing this. How do I implement my evaluation? So if we look into this, we implement these, from this is why outcome-based delivery system comes. Cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural fields. We have to think about creativity tests, different ways. Self-evaluation is also a strategy. We should think about it. The way we are thinking, I mentioned it many times in seminars that I was in an university in US last year. University does not even allow invigilator to enter into the class, into the exam hall. Honor-based system is now that implemented. We in our countries, Bangladesh, South Asia, we are not less human than them. So we have to start thinking out of the boxes the way we have been started thinking about. And this is something most important. We have to develop the scale issue. That's also was discussed this morning. If you get 100 out of 100, and if you get 50 out of 100, does it mean you know half of it? So we have to understand what does this scale means. A lot of time we don't understand this. We think of 50. Does 50 means the competency level is 50? Answer is no. You have to be very careful of meaning that. So 50 out of 100 and 100 out of 100, one should not be half of it. So that scaling is an issue. And that scaling differences, if you think about it, we now look into the scaling in terms of how do I scale and what does A, B, C, D mean? This has to be understood properly. Then you can do a good evaluation. It's not just marking. And I'm against all this idea that just mark gives me an evaluation. We have to understand the scale. What does it mean? So nowadays, if you look into it, there are different mechanisms we apply. We are used to in-class examination, quiz and case presentation, but we should now learn that even take home, and particularly COVID, this is a very good way of evaluation. It's not that bad. I will show you the experience of my courses, some of the courses I have done between before COVID and after COVID, online versus face-to-face, and how the course evaluation has varied, because I have changed the method of evaluation, changed the implementation mechanism. Oral delivery skill assessment, which cooperative skill assessment, these are all part of the evaluation mechanism. So when you are teaching a course, we should look into all these different strategies. Okay, these are different ways of designing a good course. We need to have a change of a mindset and attitude towards evaluation. And we should be prepared to accept new ideas. That is an important issue before we evaluate. In our Department of Economics, as a part of OBE, which is outcome-based learning, we have actually looked into education. We have reworked on the Bloom's taxonomy, and we created our course levels, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 level, into the Bloom's taxonomy. Said if you are teaching 100 courses, certain minimum objective behavioral things you must achieve. So we recreated our courses with target, so that by the time you finish to the master's level, you are creative. You have to be providing a creative level by 400 or 500 to 600 level course, new things that you have to add to the knowledge. So we have recreated this Bloom's taxonomy for our. So remember, one of the strategy of evaluating, we have to recreate your curriculum and say the curriculum has to design about it. That is the first step. This is something I want to share with you. I thought that, so this is a course I have taught, and this blue is face-to-face when I taught in 2019. And in 2020 with the COVID, with online, I have done. I don't see a large shift in the evaluation mechanism, even though these are take-home, even though these are also, once you have to rework on this evaluation mechanism and say, okay, I have to change it, but it has to be very similar. There are dissimilarities on one to another set of courses that online, when I went to online and this has certain field experiment was not there, obviously the performance went down. So yes, there are dissimilarities and similarities, but we have to mismatch is there. Most important thing I thought that I should share with you before I conclude is this one. I tried with my students that can you self-evaluate? So I asked my students, why don't you evaluate based on I gave them a 2-dimensional 5-layer rubric. So remember this morning we talked about all this. So I gave a 5-layer rubric and said, why don't you evaluate yourself as students present? And this is what they are evaluation, self-evaluation. Very interesting A, B, C, D grading. So you can see their evaluation, what they have done. I was impressed because even when I asked my student, why don't you evaluate yourself? It was not that bad, better than my evaluation scale. So this is what they thought. So if you look into it, you have to implement different mechanism. I implemented workshop from a field and I said, look, you have learned from the field, here is a workshop, do this workshop and show me what you have done. I have done the same thing online. So I had 2 workshops, one, and these are, I'm not going to spend how much time I have? I think I'm mostly done, right?
Sir, you have another 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay. Okay, so if I have 7 minutes, I can look in. So this is what, example, in terms of learning, I'm just showing that even in my university, East West University, I have implemented, for example, if I go to this particular video, this is something so that we implement in our university certain strategies. So trying to see whether this will come. Can you see the video coming? I'm not going to spend much time, just 2 to 3 minutes. That's to show how we actually change the classroom delivery. Classroom is no longer a simple classroom. It has to be an activity room. And this is a so I'm not going to be using the video, what you call vocal, but this is something I did in 2019 during non-COVID scenario. So this is a classroom. It's no longer the classroom the way you think that, okay, we can change. We have to understand that requires a different mechanism. So students were arranged in different ways. Each group was given a task. Based on the task, this was their summary. This is what they're supposed to do. I summarize them. Then ask them to do certain activities, produce certain field based on their trip, answer certain question, and come back. So this is something that we implemented. It's not something alien. And I was impressed with the ability of the student to learn things, to show that they can work as a group. So remember all this soft skill we talk about it. This is what they were discussing. You can see the video side that they were all discussing among themselves, even not looking at me because they were engaged in their work. So these are the students of our university working and then eventually coming and presenting. I'm just running through them. So they worked together and they eventually presented that this is what we, so in other words, evaluation, not just exam. We are used to rote learning and exam mechanism. So I'm just moving back to my presentation. Just a second. How do I? Okay. So I'm coming back to my presentation. So that was I did during a face-to-face. I did exactly the same thing. Last semester, again online. And what I did, again with a very limited skill, I created that online rooms in my university, East West University. We asked them to, discuss this in different groups. So they went, gave them a task, they worked on it, and they finished their work and come back. So I'm giving you the idea that what we have learned to think, some of the things we have implemented. It's not that we cannot implement. So let me just, sorry, this is went back. Just to give me a second. I think I'm almost done. Okay. So this is something as a modern university, how should they look like? I'm just giving a profile of a university without the name. In 1 year, this university produced 8,900 publications, one of the world top universities. So if we're looking at education, we see that education is not just student performance. They have also 40,000 students. In 1 year, this university had 178 inventions. So realize education has complete, and these are all student-led. This university had 17 Nobel Prize in their baggage. They had 1 year, 135 grants. So education institutions should understand that we should be looked into this. And these are all part of it. So that students actually learn. And the university had 75 startups in last year. So I'm just giving the way we see universities are completely different. I think that is what we should look into and say, okay, this is what education is supposed to be. I think I will stop here.
Thank you, sir, for this nice presentation. Sir, you have another 2 minutes. If you like to continue, you can continue. Otherwise,
no, I think more or less I wanted to discuss this so that we understand evaluation is not just examination. It has to be blended with all these other things. And
yes,
all different methods can be implemented. I thought that I was trying to show that I have implemented some of them in my classes. And I realized that we can use them and trust it. The system should change. So when we say OBE, it's not the same thing. It has to be, all these different evaluations should be brought into the system. Thank you.
so thank you very much, sir. It's a very nice presentation, and you just connected with a lot of facts from the ancient age up to now. So it was really thought-provoking. Very important what you mentioned, that when we talk about evaluation, actually it is very important to understand the outcome, what learning outcome we want to achieve. And if you think of 21st century skills or 21st century requirements, it is very important that the simple traditional education or mode of education will not work. So I find in some cases people start to use the term empowerment in place of education, because empowerment covers a lot of things. It needs creativity, it needs skill, a lot of achievements, and self-understanding, understanding oneself. So the graduates, if they cannot find their elements, that is very difficult for them to survive in 21st century environment, because a lot of uncertainties are there. It is not kind of linearly understanding the problem, what we saw before, maybe 50 years or 20 years back. Now it is not possible. A lot of technological changes are coming up, a lot of societal changes are coming up. So the students must understand what is their ability, and also they have to achieve all these skills, critical thinking or some other things. And also they must have to change their mindset. They have to unlearn. That is the big challenge. Sometimes students or we cannot unlearn the traditional things. So if you cannot unlearn, we cannot move forward. So sir, at this stage, we have already few questions added, so it's coming. So we can start from the first question. So Parvas Abbasi, he asked, is there an inevitable trade-off involved between democratization and greater ability of education and its inherent quality? This is the first question. So I can read 2 or 3 questions, or you can go one by one. So we have 10 minutes time now. So the first question is there any inevitable trade-off involved between democratization and the greater availability of education and its inherent quality? Sir, if you respond.
So there's what has happened, and I think this is something why we are all talking about it. As we have, education has become a mass, it's expanded. And it expanded because we wanted education to be given to all. It's no longer elitistic education. And once you do this, the trade-off that we see, to me, the way I see it, is mostly because we expanded too fast. If we expanded too fast, we have a problem of developing good quality teachers. But we also wanted only teachers' ability to judge the education. That is why education has to go through a process of saying that, look, it is something that students must learn how to achieve it. That is their target, not my target. So if it is their target, what they're looking into, we should, process change should be important. So the process change is important. Otherwise, a long time ago, if you remember the history, Syed Mustafa Ali, he was going to the Germany, and Rabindranath wrote, no, not Mustafa, I think it was Amar Shudhir Bangla Jane. That basically means it was one person giving a certificate. Education, that was individual elitist education. Modern education is more, the modern education is much more expanded. And obviously, as we expand, there will be a trade-off. But that trade-off is not what, from my point of view, from education, we have to look at the system must provide exactly the same outcome. And that is why, in order to create it, it's not individual based, it's an outcome based. The outcome, remember, outcome is not a skill, it's also critical thinking outcome. The difficulty that I see is among the science versus social science and humanities courses, because here critical thinking is a very important outcome, and we must learn how to evaluate it. And that is why the tool is not that within 5 minutes you write it. I have given an exam overnight and said, look, if this is not because of COVID, that you take the exam, think about it and come back. Then I see how you have thought about it, because that is the requirement of a course. So I think we should, somehow we are creating everything into one box and saying, this is the box, check box. Answer is not, education is not check box. Education must fulfill the outcome, and that has to be there. An outcome is not a skill. I think that is important, because a lot of time we think outcome means if we learn how to add things. It's not how to add things. Critical thinking is also an outcome, and education must provide that. So that is how I see it, the way we look into it.
Thank you very much, sir. So we are going to another question. So a lot of questions are coming. The second question is peer evaluation for the undergraduate students workable? If so, how can we introduce effectively for undergraduate students, undergraduate courses? And another question is, okay, sir, we can, the similar question. Is there any standard format of assessing students' performance outcomes? So these two you can respond.
So, see what we are used to, and this is what I was used to, that our performance was evaluated through exams. That is what is a one-dimensional assessment technique. What is one-dimensional assessment technique? That I give you a set of questions and students are performing and I give him a grade between 100 to 0 to 100. That is how it was assessed. But as we go into, which I in Bangladesh, we are not used to. In certain countries, they said maybe we should have a standardized answer first before you have a standardized question. So what is the answer? And nowadays, and that's what in the morning I believe Professor Jim was talking about, is based on rubric. So for example, peer evaluation, I asked my students, I gave them a rubric. I said, look, here are the 5 criteria based on you judge your friend. And the 5 criteria is given also with a scale, that this is called A, this is B, this is C, this is D. So if you have this mixture of fine rubrics, the rubrics creation is very important. It's a way of learning. That if we create rubrics, so I actually tried this semester with my student. I said, I'm giving you rubrics and I want you to evaluate this. So they did, and I was showing the result. But in the face-to-face, I also tried. I tried many different evaluation techniques. So once I tried with one of my courses with my students, I said, why don't you grade your own script yourself? But I give you a standard answer. This is the standard answer. I showed them the standard answer. Based on this, in my class, you evaluate. In fact, they evaluated harder than what I would have done. So I checked back just to make sure that what is happening. But I realized that it is possible. The problem is we don't trust. In the last year, I went to Oberlin College, one of the top colleges in the United States. And I was meeting with students there, I was lecturing them. And then the faculty members told me that this university does not have an exam for invigilation. So my biggest shock was invigilation. Without invigilation exam, they said, yes, it's an honor-based system. So this, and I said, what happens if students copy? They said, if students copy, students will complain to the student body and they will evaluate it and they will punish it. Teachers, they said, no, teachers are not involved. So it is actually being evaluated, is used in around the world. It is happening, and let us also try to give us pride to us. We are human beings. Obviously, once you give the right scale, it's a problem of the scale, and they will evaluate it properly. And I've seen it. So it's possible. In economics, we say truth-telling mechanism, and we design ways of truth-telling mechanism so that they tell the truth. This is how all the auction system works. So remember, these are all research area that people have worked on. They said, okay, here is the, and that's why rubric is a very good mechanism to do this.
Thank you very much, sir. So we have some more questions. We can take another 3 questions, maybe if the time permits. It's true, sir, what you told that I saw some professor in India, he start with putting 10. This is the, for example, for an assessment, he put 10 in the beginning of the semester, and he said, okay, it is you responsible to get 10 from me. So I gave you 10, and now you try. So it is a very good mechanism. So, sir, the 4th question, we already covered 3. So the question is, we usually teach, it is about large class size. So this is from Professor Sufia Islam. She asks that, is there any relationship or link between class size and student success? How does class size affect learning? So
my own feeling, and this is something that I have seen even outside around the world, that class size, we might have an idea. I give you an example. I was in China once in a university, and that is a long time ago. So the professor was saying that I have a class. He was a physics professor. So, but he said, no, we are done. I have a class now. But he was not going out. So I said, well, class where? He said, I'm going to sit in my class, in my room, and give a lecture. So he was giving not an online technically, but he was giving in 20 section 1 class. So he said, okay, I'm going to teach 20 sections from my room, because my students want to listen to me, because he's a very renowned professor. So students wanted to get a flavor of him. And so the students would listen to his, but junior teachers are all in the classroom. So he would give half of the lecture, and then the interaction will be done by the junior teachers in the class. So you can see you have to teach, you have to change the techniques in order to do this. I've seen similar techniques available in Canada, where large sections are taught by a senior professor, because students have a dream that I want to be a student of this professor. And if you restrict the students to small section, and then student fight, they said, I finished my course, I've never went to this professor. So remember, this, you have professors in university around the world. There are professors who are very good, and students enter into the university with that dream in mind. So I'm not against large section, but you have to blend it with the technique of teaching and say, this is how we teach. So my own feeling is that your objective is not large and small. The technique has to be different between large section and small section, and that is more important.
thank you very much, sir. So another question is, so we can take only one question, because I don't know, maybe because the time is almost, it is 2:50, so we can just add this one question, and then if the time permits, we can go a little more. But I think we have to close this stage. So this question is from Dr. Lal Mohan Baral. He said his question is relating to PBL, and also how PBL is different from OBs. So the question is PBL introducing as teaching learning method workable for higher education in Bangladesh? And what is the difference between OBE and PBL education?
Performance-based learning is that if you look into the performance-based learning versus outcome-based learning, performance test is more of a skill. So there are certain courses you would look at a skill. That's what I mentioned, the idea that you don't expect half doctor. There is no first class doctor and there is no third class doctor. All doctors are doctors. There cannot be. So there are certain performance and there are skills. On the other hand, objective is not just a skill. It's more of the other things. Human behavior is part of the learning. If human behavior are not there, if you do not understand human values, then you create problems in the society. Education is to create better society. And objective-based learning, when you said your objective is broad enough to bring those and said these are the issues, then it's not based on marks, it's based on a rubric that this is what is, not all of them. But remember that, yes, there are performance in the OB, not that there is no performance. There are certain things with performance. But for example, if you look into a practical test, you cannot say this test student as a third class practical. Answer is practical, you have to pass. The skill has to be there. On the other hand, outcome, there are more than that. That is what I always see. It's a much more bigger and it is included, performance is included in it.
So he wanted to know also, I think he specified the problem-based
Problem solving, yeah, problem solving, yes, problem solving is one of it, one part of it. Don't problem solving is one part of outcome based, but all these are not problem solving. Say technical education problem solving, critical thinking is not necessarily problem solving. So remember that there are variations in there. And this morning again, I was impressed with Professor Jim, and he was mentioning that Sydney University has university OBE rather than just OBE based on a program.
Thank you very
And
much,
that
sir.
includes medical science and others.
So
Thank
our
you.
time, we are already 3 minutes we crossed. So thank you very much, sir, for bringing all of these thoughts. These are very important because we now need to think regarding our assessment strategies or techniques we are using. So I think from this session, the participants will at least they will try to understand that the techniques we are using now, that cannot be standardized because it depends on the what type of outcome we like to assess. So based on the type of the outcome, we have to use the technique and tools whatever we like. So thank you very much, sir, once again for this nice presentation and responding to the questions from the participants. So we will go to the second next session very soon. So thanks from me to all the participants for your participations and for your contribution to this session. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Kamal, for conducting
Thank
the
you.
session. And as always, thank you, Professor Haque, for your wonderful speech. Of course, East West University is privileged to have such a scholar like you on board. I'm intrigued to hear that CEOs around the world are looking for basic values like honesty and integrity embedded into our students. So we can hope we will include those invisible techniques to embed basic values into our course curriculum, I would say, or course outline. Thanks again, Professor Haque, for your excellent talk.